All right. So I sent you those two mixes. You can listen to those. One had the guitar, one was just the drums, but it was pretty dry and tight. After listening to the reference track, so it was this Khruangbin. I don't even know how to say it. So that was the first thing I listened to, or first thing I did was I listened to this just to get the vibe right. Listen to the mix, what creative choices were made, and I noticed that the mix is the vibe is created by all of the parts, right? So just the drums by themselves are not gonna make the vibe. But the thing about this mix is that the bass is by far the loudest thing. Like if you listen to it, it's just overpowering everything else. The drums are really small. The kick sounds like it has a low pass filter on it. The guitars are in the back, but the bass is by far like overpowering everything in the mix, right? That's what makes it sound so dark and vintage. Anyway, so we can't really get close to that because we don't have a bass here, but we could try to get close to the drums. So I'll just go through individually, channel by channel, and show you like what I did for each of these things. But the first thing I noticed was that like on your input gain, I could tell your input gain was too low because your waveforms are really small. You can see how little they are. It's a little bit too low. You can crank your input gain a little bit to get like bigger waveforms. And a good example of that is like the vocals. I was gonna play with the vocals, but they're just, you can see like the waveforms are tiny. Like maybe right here we can kind of see there's something happening, right? But if you listen to it, it's super quiet. It's like unusable. And the reason it's unusable is because there's always a noise floor, right? So to get this, like if you listen to this with the rest of the channel, with the rest of the channels, it's totally buried in the back. So to bring it up, I had to give it plus 24 gain. But when you do that, listen to the noise floor. And when you start adding, and then when you start adding compression and stuff like that, so this now is at the proper level. Love it to my heart, soul. Love it to my heart, soul. But the noise is just crazy. Here's an A/B of like when there's no vocal, right? So yeah, you can use more input gain to get healthier signals so that they look more like this channel down here. Like this is more like what you want. Okay, anyway, so these are going to be kind of quiet as we listen, but let's start with the kick. Okay, so the first thing I did was just throw some compressor on there, and it's got a 3 ratio, -16. And really what I'm doing here is just trying to get the volume up, because without it, it's like really, really quiet. So this is just kind of to get the volume up and add up. It's not really even doing that much, right? A little bit of compression. The next was shaping it. So here's the EQ. It gets rid of all the top end. So I put this whole low pass filter on it. And then I got rid of everything below 49 because I don't think it needed it. It doesn't need to be super boomy. Here it is with the low end. Taking that out makes it a little bit tighter. It's nice when it's snappy and tight and there's not a lot of boom in it. And then the last thing I noticed was it still sounds kind of dead. So I threw a little bit of saturation just to shape it, give it a little bit more harmonic content. It's subtle, but it adds a little bit of drive. So that's the kick. Here's snare top. So again, it's like there's only like 2 things on each of these channels. It's really simple. EQ and compression, and you just got to shape them to create the sound you want. So here's that it's a really good sound. Like the tone you got out of the mic is really good, so you didn't need to do a lot to it. I scooped some of the low end and boosted the highs here. So you can see the bell of the snare is hitting at about 200. So naturally I look for that, and you don't need anything below that, because anything below that is going to be mud. So I just got rid of that, and I started the high pass shelf right at where the sound naturally, where it hits. And originally I had it like usually I'll start like a little bit before, like down here. But as I was mixing it with everything else, I noticed I didn't need that much. So it gets snappier and tighter as you go up. So I thought 182 was a good balance of still having a little bit of low end, but sounding nice and tight and present. And then same thing, add a little bit of compression. Mostly just to make it louder, right? It's not really even compressing. It's going to compress on some of the louder sections, like if I bring it over here maybe. You can hear the compression there. It's hitting, but it's light. It doesn't need a lot. Plus 5 dB gain just to bring it up in volume. So far I like it. It's sounding like really, really dry and tight. And I think that's always a good base to get like really dry and tight sounds. So that way you can add the reverb and have exact control over it. There's not even like a lot of room noise, right? Okay, so speaking of room noise, if you notice, like on the low toms, as I was mixing this, I figured this out, right? There was like some echo going on. So if you listen to this with the low tom, you hear the difference? The kick is like really tight and dry here. But then when I bring in the low tom, that microphone is picking up the kick. And it's more apparent if I drop this EQ shelf, right? You can hear it resonating in the tom microphone. So let me put this back on. For now, we'll look at that after. But what I did was I went through and I deleted all of the areas where these mics were on, and they were just picking up background noise, right? They were just creating more noise that we didn't need. So all of these sections I just cut out, so that way we have these nice isolated sections of tom. And we don't need any more than that. Okay, so going back up, we've got the kick and the snare top. Well, I'll take off the drum bus because we don't need that yet. Okay, so here's the snare bottom. This one is a little bit brighter. Same thing, all I did was put EQ on this to cut out some of the low end and boost the highs. So here it is as recorded. You can hardly hear a difference, right? It just makes it a little bit brighter. Now the trick is to balance the top and the bottom, right? So I offset them. You can see this is 7 to the right, and this one is -1 to the left. And I balance them. The bottom, because we're going for that dark sound. That's with and without. You can hear the difference. So usually when I'm mixing, let me find a section with the snare. A good mixing tip is like to work your way up from the bottom. So what I would do when I'm mixing something is like, I'll put this thing like way too loud, like obviously wrong, right? And then I slowly bring it down. And this is important with my eyes closed, because if I'm looking at the screen, I'm going to be tempted to cheat, and I'm going to be trying to gauge it based off of these lines right here. You got to use your ears and trust your ears. So you got to close your eyes, put your hand, make sure you got the fader, and then slowly bring it down until you don't notice it anymore. And once you don't notice it, that's usually right where it needs to be in the mix, give or take maybe 1 dB or something. So like I'll start with it super loud, way too loud, way too bright. Using my ears, trying to figure out where I don't notice it. And for me, it's probably about right there somewhere. And then I can take it off. You can hear the difference. There's without, with, without, with. It adds some brightness. To me, that sounds nice and tight. So I use that mixing technique, the closing your eyes and bringing the fader down till you don't. I use that for pretty much everything. Okay, next is this hi-hat. The hi-hat sounded really good too by itself. It didn't need a lot. Same thing, just some EQ and compression. This is what I did here. Take off the compressor. Again, because these microphones are all in the same room, you're getting the kick and some of the toms and stuff like that. That's why it's important to take this out. You can hear it just gets rid of all the mud. Because over time, on every single microphone, it adds up and it creates a lot of mud. So we don't need it. All we need to hear is the hi-hat. I just brought it down. You can make it brighter, you know, but we're going for a darker sound. This is all subjective. Everything, 2K, 5K. It's just a brightness control. And here's some compression, just to bring it up in volume a little bit. This is where it sits with the rest of the drums. And usually I do audience perspective, which is hi-hat to the right. You could do drummer's perspective. All right, the way the drummer hears it, but I like audience perspective. Yeah, so it's pretty simple. I did that same thing. I had the volume up and then brought it down. Okay. The next thing I did was this high tom. This was kind of cool. These toms sound nice. So that's the room. Here's the tom mic. So they came out pretty dark. So when I heard it, I was like, okay, this sounds kind of dark. It has a nice tone to it. I want to brighten it up a little bit. So scooping out the low end. Here's right, and then I do this little bell at about, what is this, between 100 and 200. It's just -2, just to give it a little bit more of a shape, because I can see there's a peak here, and sometimes this is like mud that's not needed. It's subtle, but it makes it a little bit brighter, and it makes the low end a little bit tighter. Right? And then this is the high shelf, just to give it a little bit more brightness. And then some compression. You can actually hear the compressors doing a lot here. It's got a fast release. So the faster the release is, the more natural it sounds, especially for drums, because they're fast moving instruments, right? So it's got a pretty quick release. And then usually, like when I'm looking at the threshold control, it always starts up here, right? And you can see where it's peaking. And I know that I want to bring it down a little bit, so I'll go to where, like, okay, now I know that that top part, that's what's going to be compressed. It's not a lot, but it's like the top part of the sound. Usually you can look at it. It looks different on all compressors. You know, some of them have the line that goes diagonally and then there's a horizontal line. But this compressor is pretty easy to see, like, what's happening. You can hear, like here now it's obviously overcompressed and it loses the natural sound of it, right? But right there it sounds kind of bubbly, kind of bouncy. I like it. And the gain, again, is just to bring it up to loudness. So that, I like the way that sounds. That sounds pretty cool. I noticed I didn't have the middle tom. I don't know if it got messed up in the balance or something, because I hear it in the overheads. But I only have the high tom and the low tom. I double checked the folder too and it wasn't there. So that's why this roll is going to sound weird. It's only going to be the high and the low. Alright, so that middle tom part is missing. Anyway, so the low tom, I did the same thing, right? Same approach. The low cutoff is going to be much lower on this one because we want to get some of the meat on this low tom without the mud, right? That's always the trick. So let me loop this section. So you can hear there's a lot of low frequency content going on here that we don't really need. And the thing you have to keep in mind is that this is relative to the kick and the rest of it, right? So when you're listening to it by yourself, this is the trap. We get into like, all right, we need to make this sound as fat as possible, and we need to include all this low end because obviously this sounds fatter than this, right? But perception is everything, and it's like that sizzling bacon thing, right? Like if you listen to it with a kick, you know, if we had this on there, it creates a bunch of mud, and you can hear it as these ring out and the kick comes in. It just sounds like kind of muddy, right? It's like two different. They're fighting over the frequencies here. We want to make room so the kick owns this space, and the tom is not going into the kick space, right? So now you listen to the difference. Now the tom is stopping at about 150 and he's letting the kick take that low end, so it actually punches when the kick hits on that one on the downbeat. And here it is with the high toms too. So you can hear it going down the EQ spectrum. Same thing, a little bit of compression. Fast release. Using the gain to bring it up in volume. Yeah, okay, and then now the overheads. So first thing, pan one, hard left, hard right. Originally I had these without the high shelf. I had them like this, so we'll listen to the left first. And again, like the main thing that we want to hear out of the overheads is the cymbals and like the top end of the rest of the kit. Before, you know, when you have all of this open, you hear a lot of boominess. You hear the boom of the kick, and it kind of creates mud. So if you listen with the kick, right? So listen to the kick by itself. It's really tight, and we'll do the snare too. So it sounds really snappy, really tight. Go over here. Yeah, so it sounds really tight and snappy, right? But when you add the overhead, listen to how much of the room is there. There's so much of the extra noise of the kick and the extra noise of the snare that loses the snap. Here's with, without. That's nice and tight. This is mud. This is without it. So we balance that by using the a pretty aggressive high pass, and you can hear the difference now. So you're still getting the room, it's still there, but you're not getting the boom of all the lower end stuff. That's all the low end content there. This is without it. And we're just creating space for other instruments to fill that area, so we're not fighting over the EQ spectrum. So I did the same thing with the right. And then so it sounds good to me like that. Once we got to the part with the cymbals, yeah, like over here, it's just a little bit too bright. So again, brightness control. Put this thing on there. This is super aggressive. You're hearing both. Let me solo just the left. This is without it. This is with it. It's at -22, which is really aggressive. You can tune this to your liking. So what I would do is I would play this with the mix. This is something you kind of have to wait till all the instruments are mixed. Listen to it with the guitars and everything, and then you just use this as like a brightness control. I'll mute the right just so you can kind of, oh, they're grouped. Hold on, let me ungroup. I'll mute the right one so that way you could just listen to it and how I would use it as a brightness control for the overall drum channel. So you can hear it was going up and down. It was pan hard left. It would probably make more sense if I did that with this in the middle for now, even though this is just the left channel. Alright, so that's really bright. Yeah, so just brightness control, and it's effective when you do it to both of these. So let me regroup these so that they're on the same. Okay, now I have these both on a fader, right? So I can go up and down with it. So it adds some stereo, adds a little bit of the room. Same thing, light compression on this just to bring everything together. It's hardly doing anything. It's really just to bring down like the loud sections. Okay, so the next thing I did was, so most of this is just EQ and compression. These are your drum channels here, right? So what I did was on the out, I did all of them into a bus, and I call this drum bus over here. And on this, I have two things. So all of the buses, or all of the drums are going to this bus. And this is what they sound like dry. So I have them all on this fader now. So I really like the API 2500. You can use the SSL bus comp, whatever you're used to, whatever you know well, just use that. So again, it's really light. Like you don't need a lot of this stuff going on. So here is without anything on the bus. And the point of this is just to kind of glue everything together. So here it is dry again. And you can hear it's got plus 3 dB of gain. And again, the threshold, I'm just looking for the peaks, right? So like the kick, when it comes through, I want to grab that. When the snares are like hitting pretty hard and the toms and stuff, I want to grab that. but I don't want to be like over compressing. So if you watch the view meter, you know, it's hardly ever coming on, only on like the loud parts. If you bring this threshold down, you can see the activity here. So I would look for that activity. And that looks pretty good right there, watching the view meter. So that's sounding pretty good. Again, it's a light ratio. It's only 2. Medium attack and a faster release. I pretty much use that setting for all my compressors, unless it's like a bass where I want really sustained long notes, but usually go for quicker release, medium attack. And then the things to really consider here are just the threshold. You want to look for those peaks and the loudest parts of the sound to tame those and give it, you know, you can go for a little bit more aggressive. See if this makes a difference. All right, it's a little bit more aggressive. I just find that it's a little bit nicer to do it a little bit less. And then the last thing here is this Ozone 9. This is super subtle. It's not making a big difference. There's this preset called Clear Character. I just kind of was going through the presets, listening to them. And I think it does exactly what it says. It just adds a little bit of clarity and character. So here it is without it. Without. With. Without. With. So it's really, really subtle, but it helps just glue everything together, right? Like you just want to, in the bus, the main thing you want to do is just bring it all together. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Obviously, it's subject to like the rest of the track, right? And like once you start mixing in the other things, you're gonna notice that some things need to come up, some things need to come down, some things might need to be darker than others. But I think this is a good starting point. Having a nice tight, dry kit. I was thinking about adding some reverb, but I just threw it on the guitar. And this is literally just like a little bit of EQ and some reverb. There's the EQ on the guitar. I just cut it below 200 and using a little bit of the Valhalla EQ. I mean reverb. Just to give it some space. But all that stuff will come later when you get creative and finish the track. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the drums. All right, man, hit me up if you have any questions or anything. Hope this is helpful. Peace.